Hi, my name is Rachel Abrams. I'm a marketing specialist at Agile Velocity. We provide Agile coaching, training, and tools that deliver results like faster time to market and improved quality for technology driven organizations. We also help organizations implement and build AI solutions with minimal risk and greater impact. In today's webinar, we are exploring the benefits of AI for technology leaders. Transformation coach Randy Hale will now introduce our panelists.
Thank you for coming today. Really looking forward to our conversation. We've got a fantastic group of panelists, and I'll do some quick intros, and you'll hear a bit more context about their roles and the role that AI is playing in their lives. I'm going to share a screen here for those of you who want to potentially follow up with any of our panelists later. We've got a QR code for their LinkedIn profiles as well as their company URLs here. So I'll just go left to right across here. We've got Vince Epperson, who has been in technology leadership roles, senior executive roles for the better part of a dozen plus years. And he's really put his money where his mouth is. He made the leap and is founded his own AI centered startup. So really looking forward to hearing from Vince today. We have Sha Ma with us, who is the CTO at Catalyst Software. And prior to that, she was VP of engineering for GitHub for their core platforms. And we've got Michael Sobota, who is VP of engineering at Uplight. And without further ado, we're just going to jump into the conversation. All right. So our goal here today is really to share perspectives, hear, what it is these leaders are dealing with on a day in, day out basis, what's working, hopefully maybe some stories around what hasn't worked so that, collectively we can all benefit from their wisdom. I'm going to start a little bit from a more focused tactical level, and then we'll kind of zoom out from there. So, Michael, the first question I'm teeing up is for you initially, and then we'll ask Vince and Sha to weigh in as well. But the first one is around team impact. So, as VP of engineering, how has AI changed the way your teams work?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. And glad to be here alongside Sha and Vince. So yeah, how has AI changed the way our teams work? Not surprisingly, in many different ways. I would say the biggest thing is it's lowered the burden to entry into a lot of different things for the way our teams work. Some specific examples, like when in the engineering department, as a company that's grown, both inorganically and organically on the acquisitions we've done, we've battled a lot with this sort of idea of Chesterton's fence, right? The principle is like, don't destroy what you don't understand, or don't change what you don't understand. And that could be great, but it's also such a slippery slope into tech sprawl and into going being, I don't understand this thing. So, right, what are engineers really good at? Well, I don't understand it. I'm going to go build my own thing. Well, I don't understand that, so I'm going to go build my own thing. So using AI technology to just get people more comfortable with going into the unknown. I'm not sure why this thing is here. I don't really want to touch it. Let me bring AI and sort of pair up. Let me bring in some prompt engineering to be like, what is this? It's in a language I don't know. What does this code block do? Oh, now I understand it. Now I can deal with it. Now I can change it. And we've lowered our footprint in not sprawling out and building new lines of code that we don't need to. So that would be one of the biggest ways. I think it's just lowering the barrier to entry. And we've seen that at the company across not only engineering, but other roles as well. How can people just feel a little bit more comfortable with going beyond just the Google search to be like, I don't know what this is, I'm going to research it, to being a lot more enabled with things like AI and ChatGPT to be like, it's not just a Google search away. It is truly now a conversation of something that I can understand a topic, or I can feed it something and it can give me a summary. So I think that's the largest way we've seen AI change the way our teams work.
Nice. Sha, I'd love to hear you weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, it's also around kind of a company culture and a team culture that you want to build when it comes to any new technology, right? And I think, with the recent ChatGPT OpenAI that was unveiled like 2 years ago, a lot of people have excitement in this area. There's GitHub Copilot. People want to try out and see how that improves productivity. And so I think to Michael's point, right? Like you want to create an environment of learning and exploration for your teams in terms of how do they adapt the latest and greatest AI tools and technology that's out there in a safe and responsible manner without compromising your customer data and things like that. And so if you're a venture or PE-backed company like our Catalyst into Tango today, you're probably getting asked and hammered by your investors in terms of like, what is your AI strategy? What are your teams doing, for customers, for yourselves, on tooling and things like that, right? And so I think, as we look at it more holistically as a technology leader, you want to make sure that one, you don't fear new technology, right? Like, AI might be a buzzword, it might be kind of the latest fad, but it's just like anything else. It's like the latest, new frameworks or language that's out there. So, what is the basic level understanding of it? Do you have guidelines, policies in place for your teams to be playing with these tools, right? And so one of the first things that we did was we actually consulted outside counsel from a legal perspective and said, hey, a lot of our teams want to use Copilot. They want to explore, prompt engineering and ChatGPT. They want to see how they can, work in like, RAG models and like, create embeddings. Like what do we tell our teams, right? And, we decided that like, hey, if you're going to experiment with AI, register using your company emails. Do not compromise customers' data. Do not feed that data back into any of the models or learning engines that's out there. And then, like when we actually put something into our production system that powers our product, let's actually look at the license that we use. And so in particular, for example, you can pretty much get GPT equivalent on OpenAI or Microsoft, but we opted for Microsoft licensing just because we have a lot of enterprise customers. And it's just, more protection and things like that around if you were to productionalize AI. So.
Awesome. Vince, I can tell you're chomping at the bit to weigh in here as well. I know you've got a lot of experience, sponsoring a lot of the kind of efforts that Sha and Michael just talked about. So Vince, I'm going to maybe frame a little bit of a bridging conversation here. So I'd love your perspective on bridging the team impact with like specifically from a tactical perspective for other tech leaders out there. What are the use cases? Like what specific use cases would you recommend? Like if they're just exploring or even thinking about it, like where should they start?
Yeah, very good, Randy. I would say, and also to add what Michael and Sha said and build on that, in this particular area for use cases, number one is like prototype rapid development. It's been huge. I started this business in April, really didn't start any sort of code, maybe a little bit of upfront prototyping stuff until end of April, beginning of May, something like that. Never intended to do a website. Like I have a fully functioning website up and running right now with a lot of complexity built in behind it. Just the ability to accelerate your knowledge and then to go try things. So if I want to try something, I just really, I've always been a fan of 3D printers and just prototyping, fail fast, fail cheap. And what it's allowed me to do is just take that to the next level completely. I have certain tools that I use for certain things. Each one has its own strength versus the other, versus some of the LLMs and things like that. But once you experiment with that a little bit as a technology leader, you can really build kind of a multi-agent workflow for things and fully automate stuff. And then the information and what you want to do, you just feed in a little bit, and then a lot comes out on the other side, or you can automatically generate exactly what you're looking for in the format, right? I'd also say like an honorable mention there for technology leaders is, of course, software development. You mentioned I've been an executive for a while. I was able to go and at least do some, the opinions may vary, but some coding that was usable, and did it with GitHub Copilot, right? And then more recently, as I've evolved with that, I'm able to go and I use Claude for some agent workflows, and I'm able to go and really just give it a few things. I've given it some examples and trained it a bit. And then on the other side, I'm now able to copy and paste and run with no errors. And, you know, I keep it kind of narrow scoped, but that sort of prototyping, like before you'd take some code from OpenAI or ChatGPT, it didn't really always work, you know. And now I'm getting reliable results with Python, JSON structured stuff from tools. I'm, you know, just HTML even for the website, and it just works. So that ability to go and rapid prototype now is a game changer for everyone, especially technology leaders.
Nice. So we just talked a little bit about where would you start? What are the use cases? You know, what is it good for if you haven't started? In a conversation with David Gipp, who's a colleague of mine, he has some really interesting thinking. He says, if you're having a conversation around what is AI good for, then presumably that implies that there are things that AI is not good for. So that's a little bit of a tee up, Michael, for the next question for you. What are the risks of AI using? And maybe coupled with the risks, you know, are there things that you would recommend staying away from?
Yeah, totally. You know, I think about some of the risks and things we should consider in utilizing AI, and it kind of comes down to maybe one boiled down risk, which is the cost benefit analysis. If I boil it down, it would be that, right? There's plenty of risks and there's plenty of reward. And if those risks get realized, it comes back to we can't be upside down on that cost benefit analysis. So rather than maybe thinking about what things are good and bad, I think it comes back to knowing across that people, process, and technology, what is the expected benefit that you're trying to get here? What's the cost that you're going to put into it, and how much cost are you willing to put into it, and how much of that unknown cost where that risk may or may not be realized come into it. So what we've tried to do is try to really frame up like understanding, well, what are the personas of people who interact with data here? What are the personas of people who want to interact with AI or build AI into our products? And we've thought about, well, how much is that cost, and what is the risk of, you know, an engineer taking something and exposing data they shouldn't, or taking our IP and exposing it? Well, I don't know. If we've gotten massive reward out of those efficiency gains and that risk is realized and it comes at a cost, then maybe it's okay. So I think for us, we've kind of always looked back at that cost benefit analysis and say, like, is this good use? Is this bad use? We may not know yet, but let's not get caught upside down on that cost benefit. And really keep our eyes on, like, why are we doing this? What's that business need? And we're also keeping an eye out on the industry, right? As more time passes, there's more empirical evidence out there where we start to understand what others have seen the benefits be, or what others have seen the costs, you know, that get racked up. So we're definitely looking at some bigger players who are pouring a lot of money and investment into these things, and keeping a close eye to say, like, hey, the more we understand about the environment, the more we've seen empirically what has and hasn't happened, we can get better at making that cost benefit analysis. And then we can decide this is a good use for us, or this is a bad use for us.
Yeah. Sha, I'm curious from your perspective, what conversations do you find yourself in as it relates to risk around AI?
Yep. I think it depends a lot on like internal, external use cases, right? And so internally, if we are to use this as a productivity tool, whether it's for engineering or, you know, for example, our CSMs in terms of answering customers' questions or digging through kind of call logs, right? What are the internal risks in terms of potentially compromising customer data, feeding it into learning models where you don't want it to? Like, do we have guardrails against that? I think that's probably the biggest risk. But most of the internal cases we have is more around productivity or, kind of this agent approach of how do we help people get their work done quicker and faster now with the AI tools that we have available for us. Externally, I think of AI as just like any other technology, right? How do we apply AI in our products? Again, safely and responsibly, just like we would do with any open source technology or language that we build into our product. And I think probably one of the bigger risks on that front for for a business like us is around hallucinations. And so there's the what's useful for us in terms of we build tools for customer success managers. It's a SaaS tool, and you can use that to manage your customers. And so we built a lot of risk analysis and sentiment extraction around quantitative data, and those haven't been as useful for like the large language model or recent like Gen AI use cases. But we also have a lot of call logs, email exchanges, recordings through Gong or Chorus that our customers, that our CSMs, which are our customers, really want to kind of say, hey, there's a lot of language data in this thing. I'm not the most technical audience, but how do I extract risk information from this? How do I extract action items from this, or sentiment analysis from this data, so that I can better manage my portfolio of customers or book of business, right? And for that, I think their biggest concern is getting it wrong. So that's where kind of some of that hallucination comes in, is that AI doesn't always get it right. And you still need, this is where you kind of have to explore different models. And I think Michael called out models versus pricing considerations. Obviously the latest models are probably going to do better on the hallucination front. There's also guardrails you can put in place, additional, you can set up a RAG model where you can feed your own context embedding and tell them, kind of how risk tolerant you are in some of these things. But, at the same time, right, there's cost associated with using later generations or later versions of certain models versus, like GPT-3 is always going to be cheaper than GPT-4 in terms of, how much you call it and how much you use it. And for like maybe 80% of the use cases, that's fine. So where does that come in, and how do you kind of fine tune those models to provide the best experience that you can for your customers?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you talk about complexity. Like the ecosystem you're dealing with is that's an interesting one for sure. Vince, any points you'd like to add to the conversation around risk?
Yeah, just to reinforce that, it seems like everybody's using AI in everything now to varying degrees of success. I did a post on LinkedIn not too long ago and just kind of making fun. I talked about somebody's inevitably doing an AI-infused pencil sharpener now. It's really about, Sha and Michael talked about it. It's really about what's the business case? What does the customer care about first? If the technology fits that, then fantastic. What AI did is it opened up a lot of things with natural language processing, especially. For instance, like chatbots, it's been really, really overdone now. Everybody knows about that. But I used to hate chatbots. I never talked to them. I didn't even really like talking to people live on chats, right? So, and now you can go in and pop in and it's like, bam, and it remembers you and it has the context, and it's like, it's actually, pretty good to use. So there are tons and tons of use cases, but I think the risk can be, when do you overuse it? And honestly, that's been tempting for me in building the DevSage site. The site's about product management and startups and content generation and running you through ideas and crowdsourcing with your teams. And so there's tons of opportunity there to apply that technology, but I didn't apply it everywhere. There's places where something a bit more traditional and very robust and reliable that gave great results, and that's what I used. So I think right now, especially with a lot of hype, and I'm not actually sure AI is overhyped, I think it's going to continue to outpace our expectations over the coming months and years. But that has people just jumping all over it to do things that may or may not make sense for their customers.
Yeah. I'd like to build on, Sha. There were a couple of things that you said that I'd like to maybe bubble up to the 30,000-foot level for a moment. What guidance would you give, maybe related to your experience? And it sounds like you might be in a more advantageous spot than some of the technology leaders who might be listening today. But when it comes to funding, whether that's making investments in, tooling, or funding could be related to, I need to carve out capacity for my teams, not so much from, building new AI capabilities into the product, but the flip side of that is like just from an internal efficiency, they need more capacity to figure out how to best use AI. So just kind of framing that whole whole context there from a investment in tooling and investment of time. What would your guidance be? Like, how do you think leaders can maybe get what they need around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually, interestingly enough, we're actually seeing this from a lot of our larger enterprise customers, in that, again, like to what Vince is saying, right? Like AI has been overhyped a lot in the last couple of years. So every IT department, every like enterprise company, there's probably someone asking, whether it's a CISO or a CIO, like, what's our company strategy around AI? Like, what are we doing? Like, what's right? And how do we safely introduce this? How do people benefit from it from various functions? Like we have people from finance asking how they can leverage AI, so on and so forth, right? And so what we're actually seeing from some of our large enterprise customers is that they've actually, I think very smartly carved out an AI budget for the various functions and departments to actually, buy tools that they think will help with their general productivity. It's not a huge budget, but at least it's an exploration and learning and development budget, so that both from a company perspective, you're like, hey, we're investing in this. We want people to be familiar with this so that they don't, they're not fearing new technology. They understand this and they understand it as a tool that they could potentially use to help generate productivity in different departments. We're not going to be overly prescriptive, but we want to carve out a budget for people to do this under certain guidelines. And so very interestingly enough, some of our customers, the reason that I bring this up is that we're hearing from our enterprise level customers is that when we sell our tool to CS teams, customer success teams, a lot of times they're like, hey, I've only budgeted this much for my vendor customer success spend for the year. But now I have an AI budget. So if you have an AI feature that I can leverage in my job to kind of help me with workflow productivity or with sentiment analysis and risk, and that makes it easier for me to manage a bigger book of business, then I can actually leverage some of my AI budget to kind of help offset some of that cost, right? And so that is something that, I was actually pretty surprised by, is that some of our customers, like, I've already budgeted for your tool, but now I have a new budget that I can actually, spend more on your tool if you had, these offerings or these features that we wanted. So that's something that I've heard that I thought was a very smart approach for some of the more enterprise businesses.
Yeah, that's a great insight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to Vince next. So Vince, sort of just like maybe building on Sha's response there. What else would you add, as related to, but before making the leap and founding DevSage earlier this year, you were in a very different situation in a very large organization. How are those investment decisions made, and what are some things that worked for you to try and get the right level of investment, whether it be actual dollars investment or capacity investment?
Yeah, and I'm actually bootstrapping DevSage now, which brings a whole new level of fun, right? But I was prepared for it. I'll just go back to, Sha was mentioning, it's super laser focused on customer. I don't really want to do anything. I don't want to spend any time that's not laser focused on something that's going to provide value to the customer. And so just to kind of build on what Sha was saying, it's really, it's encourage customers to start prioritizing the things that they find most important. For instance, so for our site, it's around startup founders and product managers, and it's kind of the front end of product development. We have another product on the back end, but what I really want that to do, and what I focused on, putting all of the investment into, is that exact scenario where I can apply those technologies, and a lot of it is AI backed. But I want those product managers to be in front of customers. That's what they do best. And that's right now, at least until we start having like AI interviews with people, and they're working on the video that does, movements of hands and natural, it may be coming. Those people have to go and actually talk to customers. I really don't want them to have to spend days and hours generating a bunch of content that they need to, because it's communications to their teams, to the engineering teams and things like that. How about we make that go down to minutes and seconds? You do a little bit of a tweak and then you crowdsource that and send it out to the team. First of all, you can just send it out to everybody, so you never miss people out of that communication loop. The other example is, we're working on a product that's going to come next month. And it's really, just to oversimplify it, it's gonna take over a lot of duties of like Scrum Masters, especially when I have developers who are part-time Scrum Masters. Their heart's not always in it. They're kind of doing it because nobody else wanted to. Like, can I automate that? Can I get rid of a few meetings and take care of some things that makes developers more productive? They're writing code, they're writing tests instead of being out there and in meetings, and the planning stuff's important. Don't get me wrong, it has to happen, but it can happen a heck of a lot faster and more efficient. I think when I think about the investment there, those are the things I'm putting the investment into. When you're thinking about it from the customer side, they would make investment into products like that because it does deliver that sort of productivity for them.
Yeah. Awesome.
Another
Michael?
area, actually, just to kind of add to that, is you can actually think a lot about your existing tools and vendors and how they might support you in some of this effort, right? And so even without internal funding, we've had great partners. Like if you have strong relationships with like AWS or Databricks or some of the or GitHub or some of the technology vendors that you have in the space, everyone is trying to add AI functionalities. They're trying to build out their AI ecosystems. There's a lot of sponsored conferences out there. So, if you can work with one of the vendors to say like, hey, Databricks, for example, I know you all have now the ability to do text to SQL or text to BI. If the data is on your platform, and we're one of the users of your platform, can we partner with you to actually build out a shiny example of this on our product? And how do you work with us to kind of make that happen? Because then we can speak to this use case at your next developers conference, and this will be a really good example of how other people can adopt this technology, right? And so we've had a lot of successes just working with our vendors to get some of those kind of initial projects started.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good insight. Michael, anything you would add on the business case, obtaining investment?
Yeah, I would just say like the way we've approached it is exactly kind of how Sean and Vince have explained some various things. We've looked at it as everything we do is about the customer. It's customer first. And in a lot of ways, we've made these decisions as plain old vanilla product and engineering decisions, right? Is there value here? Is there time criticality here? What's the level of effort to go into that? And then if we want to be bringing AI into the product, well, cool. Does that change the equation of value that's going to go to the customer or some of the time criticality aspects of that? Okay, then that comes into play. Or is it going to make the level of effort lower? And we've been really heavy on that partner aspect that Sha mentioned. AWS, GCP, Databricks, right? All things we use. And when we have use cases that say, cool, we can maximize business value or really bring lower effort, but we need to go do some POCs. How do we get that for free? We turn the partner, and the partner is more than willing to say, I'm right there with you, right? So we don't have to outlay any extra really cash for that. We're just bringing the partners to the table to say, like, let's work together and get some feedback there.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's one overarching theme here is leverage your partners because they're willing to invest, right? They want the wins. It's going to help them build those case studies. Okay, awesome, love it. I'm going to go back, Sha, to you for this next question. What are you seeing in terms of talent, skill, knowledge gaps, and how are you addressing those?
Yeah, so I think one of the great things about kind of AI becoming more mainstream is that the barrier to entry for AI for some of these kind of talent skills is a lot lower than before. I think, and then also it's also becoming more mainstream in that like every single developer can work on an AI feature or an AI product versus I think previously, you know, AI used to be limited to a very small internal team, usually made up of, you know, your data scientists, ML engineers, who are kind of the gatekeepers of an internal like BI system or a data warehouse where all of your data resides, right? And they tend to like kind of build more research projects that are not as widely applied and won't benefit your customers. It might help further understanding of your customer use cases and data points, but it's not really being applied more broadly in your development environment or that's actually having customer impact. And I think with the kind of AI becoming more mainstream, like, you know, people are spending a lot less time building the models, you know, in terms of like learning from the data set, building from the data set, you know, so everyone can basically say like, you know what, I have a foundational model that I can start from, you know, whether it's GPT, Claude, you know, Anthropic, like whatever, and I can add and layer on my own data as context to help improve the interpretation of the data that I have that's very specific to my use case. A lot of that is just API transactions. There's a ton of like open source tools out there. Like, you know, I think Vince mentioned, you know, for building like chatbots, right? Like everyone has a chatbot, but you can just like use something like LangChain and kind of get a lot of that like out of the box pretty easily. So I do think that the barrier to entry in terms of building AI features has become a lot lower and it is more accessible to, you know, your like, you know, just development teams in general without having to hire for very specialized skill sets in certain areas.
Yeah, and Vince, I'm really curious, like based on your whole focus and what you're building, how does the, you know, the thought around talent and skills factor into like how you're approaching your problem space?
Yeah, and it was a bit strange for us when we started. You know, we're really looking for me in particular, you know, our interfaces to the customer, our website or Teams or Slack eventually, you know, things like that. It needs to be a natural interaction with our customers. We don't want them to experience the complexity. Hey, go write code, or hey, go talk to customers, right? So for us, you know, the initial was like, kind of need full stack engineers. But if you have like a good Python background, you know, Sha mentioned LangChain. I mean, that's really, I mean, Python's the way to go there. And a lot of the early stuff was, now Microsoft is now more like, you know, like they're a little bit of a departure from the open source stuff where it's more .NET type and, you know, or JS, you know, things like that. Python's still prevalent, but they're de-emphasizing it a bit. So I was looking for like that sort of skill set to put these in place. And I think that's like a resurgence. Like that used to be a pretty popular thing. And then, you know, Python is widely used, but, you know, not everybody just does Python and specializes there. And I think it's because of like LangChain and things like that, it's making a comeback. And of course, you know, structured JSON is super important for this stuff. If you're trying to produce something in an output for the customer, I need this to be here and I need it to be guaranteed and I need this to be here and it needs to look like this. And Python handles that really well. So there's a little bit of a rewind of that skill set. But then to add to what, you know, Sha was saying, it's also, you know, I find people are out of the loop a little bit on what's going on. And here's where I'll make my public service now. So we find ourselves doing some training and suggestions and, hey, use this tool. You know, we're working with a vendor and we're like, please start using this. You know, we've used it and it's fantastic. But the information stream and the pace that everything is changing right now, I'm having trouble keeping up with it. And I mean, I've built some automated pipelines, you know, to bring in, but it's like I'm probably a few days behind on trying to catch up. And I'm sure there's something super important that happened in those 2 days because it is such a rapid pace. So I think the other one is, you know, when you get talent that you make sure that they're doing a bit of research or they're aware about certain things, that really helps you. You don't have to do as much learning and knowledge transition when you bring them into an environment like this. And you know, I did a LinkedIn article not too long ago And I just did an image comparison. I was like, hey, use a bunch of different models and try, because some of them are better at things than others. I put 2 examples up, and I was talking about the engine that we're using on the website, and it's really good. And then maybe 2 days later, not even 2 days, the new Flux image engine, and it's like blowing people away, like the level of realism. And so you have to have people that will take the time to take a look and are super open-minded about, hey, before I jump in and start doing this, I'm going to just check, because there might be a better way to do it now. 2 days later, even.
Wow. Yeah. One of the things I want to tee up, we absolutely want to get some live questions from our audience. So feel free to leverage the Q&A capability within Zoom. I'll be kind of scanning some of the questions might feed into the prompts that we already have, but feel free to submit your questions as we go here. And I'll ask Michael to kind of continue the conversation with maybe perhaps a little bit of a bridge. So anything you would add around just the talent and skills side of it, and then maybe taking that into data management concerns?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've seen both the benefits and challenges on the talent side, right? Like totally echoing what Shaw's saying in terms of the lower barrier to entry. That's been super helpful for us, and it's been really cool to see what folks can do and the ways that they can learn and grow and leverage AI. And then, right, we've had challenges depending on how, if you will, vertically integrated you want AI to be into your product, right? How deep does the talent need to go in terms of actually engineering the deep guts of the AI? Well, that talent is maybe hard to come by, and you have to think about your people retention strategy and your total reward strategy and the personas of the types of like job descriptions that you have, not only in engineering, but like we're thinking about data personas across the company. And what are our expectations of like a level of how much they should know and be able to do things with data and use things that are maybe AI enabled. So as much as it's been super helpful for us, it's also kind of really rethought, like, how do we attract and retain the right talent? And are we going to start actually evolving all of the job duties at a company over time? And I think the answer is yes. So staying on top of that is a challenge. Parlaying that into the data management, right, that you mentioned, right? Like we've seen some challenges, and we've maybe taken a couple strategies to approach it. One, garbage in, garbage out is just much more material now. Sha mentioned like hallucinations, right? You see these stories where we've mentioned chatbots a lot. There's that airline chatbot that got the policy wrong and told a customer something completely wrong, and they had to honor it, and it cost you a bunch of money. So now that garbage in, garbage out is much more material. Like big decisions can be made. There's big impacts if there's things going wrong. And then it's a double whammy, because now you have to come back and fix those bugs. You have to retrain models. You have to do things, and that can be expensive too. So garbage in, garbage out is much more material. So having a data management strategy around, what's my people aspect? What's my process aspect? What's my technology? How am I leveraging tools to understand data lineage? How am I using sort of catalogs to have one enterprise view of our data and maybe control a little bit about what models are being built and what guardrails need to go in? So we've done a lot of thinking about what are those personas and what kind of governance structure are we setting up for executive sponsorship, business sponsorship, technical sponsorship. A lot of that goes into bringing in all those different functions, from legal to operations, and obviously critically like engineering and product. So that's kind of how we've approached it. We think a lot about it from people first, and then we've done a lot of thinking on how do we continue to evolve this to make sure that we are balancing data privacy, not only from like what we are obligated to do legally, what we're obligated to do for our customers, but also what we want to make ourselves obligated for, just on principle of how we want to use this technology. But the kicker is how to do that without destroying the potential value you could provide to your users or to your business. So people, process, technology, right? It's always present, but I think it's setting up that strategy to know it's people first. What are those personas? How are they going to use data? How are they going to source data? And then leverage technology to have some governance. Because yeah, garbage in, garbage out is material. Like you can have a ton of reward, but you can have some silly mistakes that can be quite costly.
Yeah, indeed. I'm going to pivot to one of the questions that just came in after my prompt, which I'll restate again. Any questions you all have, feel free to contribute those via Zoom, but really good question we have here. And Vince, I'll start with you. So the question is, how might the IT job landscape evolve as generative AI becomes more prevalent in the industry?
Yes, very good one. I think it's still, there's the general principle of it, and then there's the specialized side of it, right? So in the general principle of it, and IT, by the way, can encompass networks and support, and also a lot of people kind of lump software development into IT. Maybe I'll cover a little bit of both. A lot of the AI is really good at large sets of data, structured or unstructured, but especially unstructured. You can analyze trends and automate things. And that's really the big key principle across the board is how can I automate things and free people up and finding that productivity. So from the IT perspective, whether that's helping me write code or some scripts to set up, routers across a campus or a building, or just finding those use cases that, you have an army of people that are doing it today, or you have a small set of people that are overstretched in a lot of cases. And how can I make their life easier and automate a lot of it? In the IT world, I think there's huge opportunity for a lot of that. And AI has the capability, and I don't just mean like Gen AI, and I think natural language processing only, is the interface, but a lot of the more traditional AI, where it's machine learning and, predictive modeling and things like that, can help you find trouble spots and head them off before they happen. And it can do it automatically in most cases. And that reduces the burden on IT type teams. And it can find use cases like that, and we can solve a lot of things that free people up, and can have them again. Maybe you need something done on your laptop and you can't find a human because they're tied up with something else, whatever it is. But it frees those people up for some of the things that we really can't cover with AI yet.
Yeah. And then I'll go to Michael next. Michael, are there any specific scenarios that you're seeing, the change in how you're applying AI in terms of like IT related capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's that I think if you look at the multiple layers as I was listening to sort of Vince's answer. It's about how can truly information technology, right? Like, so AI is really good, and anything that's even in the AI sphere of like you produce so much information, so much data that you can turn into information that you can then turn into knowledge. So going from data to information to knowledge, IT has a huge part in making that transition and getting a ton of leverage out of the company. So it's not only about the data you're producing as a means of doing business, but then you're deploying technologies to make everybody able to work in the information age. And now you're applying AI to how do you even manage that technology itself. So that's how we're seeing it. I think it is how can we do more with less? And it's doing it in a way that doesn't burn folks out, but actually makes that aspect a really good leverage point for the company.
Awesome. Sha, anything you'd like to add on the IT job landscape and how you're applying it from an IT perspective?
Yeah, so when we think about it, I guess for SaaS businesses, a lot of it comes down to things like GDPR, SOC 2, security and compliance, right? And so I think Michael talked about a lot of this extensively in that there's the what data what data are you retaining? What's your data retention policy? How fresh is your data? Who has access to that data? Where does it reside? Does it reside in EU data centers? Does it reside in North America data centers? And I think when you think about that, just in terms of who has access to what data, if a customer churns, how do you go about deleting that data out of your system? And data privacy, like all the things that we're looking at. You want to make sure that you have policies in place, and you want to kind of look at how potentially Gen AI or AI tools that you have introduced into your stack might change that, right? By having your model somewhere, or calling APIs that help you generate something that's not part of your hosted stack. Does that potentially cause GDPR concerns, or are your European customers going to want a vendor disclosure form for something like that, right? Like, so those are the things that I would say, like, to think about. It's no different than what you have to think through for any data vendors and any access and permissions that you have on these systems. But just kind of think about that with that context.
Awesome. All right, next question. We'll start with Vince because you're the one that instigated the question. You mentioned AI impacting Scrum Master work, and I'm going to inject my perspective here. If you had asked me 8 years ago what the typical pattern from my perspective was probably well north of 80% of organizations had dedicated Scrum Masters, full-time role, and it's been a pretty drastic change from 80-20 one way to like 20-80 now the other way, where I would say in my more recent experience, it's been like 20% of organizations have full-time dedicated Scrum Master roles. It's more frequently a team member wearing the Scrum Master hat. So just setting up that context in terms of, working with dozens of companies, like how I've seen that shift over the past several years. But you mentioned, Vince, AI impacting Scrum Master work. Can you elaborate more on this? And what else are you seeing as AI impacts just general, like how are teams working?
Yeah, good. My number one thing when I started this company was I've seen firsthand over many years the pain of developers. You sit down and you're at your keyboard, you're getting ready to bang out some code or write a test, and you're like, I could do that like 20 different ways. And of course, Agile helped a lot with that from, the communications perspective, and the governance that's there and making sure everybody's aligned. And you're right, it used to be a very formal role. It kind of evolved to where, it's really being pushed to the developers in a lot of cases. When I noticed that happening, and inevitably every time I talk to someone about that, and they're like, what do you do? When I'm going around meeting teams and just kind of getting started in a new role or something like that. It's like, yeah, I developed this, and I'm a part-time Scrum Master. Nobody else wants to do it, so I'm stuck with it. Like that person's heart is not really into it, and honestly, it's a very tough role. You have to get it right. I've had some amazing Scrum Masters throughout my career, and they make a huge difference. What I'm trying to do is, I wouldn't take it as we're replacing Scrum Masters. Maybe a little bit of that's already been done without AI, but it's making it very consistent. One of the best use cases that you can find, AI or anything else, is when I have a super experienced, awesome person. Let's say Scrum Master. And then I have some, kind of people who are maybe mid-career and they've just kind of gotten into it and they're doing a great job, or fresh and, they're learning, making some mistakes. We've all been through that. Can I actually just level that up to where everyone is pretty much at that expert level? And then I can use this natural language processing capability to make it super easy for everybody who's not an expert Scrum Master or not an expert in Agile, but they are surely an expert in writing code. That's really what I mean about, when we're looking at automating things, it's not just Scrum Master, it's the whole product development process. But to me, that was one of the key points, and especially just from like my personal observations on it.
Awesome. Michael, anything you would add to that, including your experience with full-time Scrum Masters, the possibilities of AI augmented Scrum Mastering?
Yeah, totally. I comes back to really what we were trying to do in the first place with this idea of agility and making sure that companies, as you scale up, you still have that ability to respond to threats or opportunities, and you need that agility. So I totally agree sort of with what Vince is saying. And I've seen the same stuff that you opened, Randy, right? That it's kind of flipped a little bit, right? That like everyone had dedicated. Now it's harder to see that. There are a lot of people wearing those hats. So one, the consistency is huge. And two, maybe I'll answer that. The second part of the question that came in is what are the other aspects that are being impacted to Agile in general? Is I really think about humans at scale and what can AI do? And that goes into like crazy big ideas that are like exciting, but also terrifying. Right. As you maybe bring some of this stuff in house and you do more aspects of clean room, can you have a scrum master on steroids that is literally everywhere? They're in every stand up, they're in every team Slack channel, they're seeing the patterns and they're starting to say, like, hey, this is what we need to do. There's too many dependencies here. Like, that's a terrifying thing. And it's also like, it could be really cool. So yeah, like that could go to a lot of places. Like, how could you start to bring little a agility into the company by having AI make those connections and be everywhere all at once? But does it become Big Brother, right? Suddenly is the CEO listening to the AI too much and he's like the AIs are in the company? Like it gets kind of crazy. But I kind of see that's where things can go. Like managing humans at scale becomes really hard for any one individual. It becomes hard for teams of teams. So what is AI's role in that? I think it can really help, but it's got to be used in the right ways.
Yeah. Sha, what would you add? And are there, use cases that you're either, utilizing today or maybe considering exploring kind of related to this idea?
Yeah, some of our Scrum Masters are kind of are using like, I mean, there's a lot of AI tools out there for doing like meeting notes and action items. And so whether it's Zoom or Gong or Chorus, I think we've used it pretty well in that. Like, I feel like a lot of the gaps is that we have a meeting and a lot of times we walk away from the meeting, everyone's like, okay, I think I got this out of the meeting, but it's slightly different. And I think now you actually have a note taker that can, consistently send out like, here are the highlights from this meeting and here are the main action items and takeaways. It could get a little bit overwhelming. I think Michael is saying like at what point, right? Like I feel like literally I get on some of these Zoom calls and every other day there's like a different note taker that someone is bringing into our Zoom meeting. And so at which point you're just like, oh, my note taker is there and your note taker is there. And this meeting is just all like, AI agents and note takers. But, at least I do like to see that, we have started using like kind of more creative ways of saying like, how do we make sure that we consistently capture action items, takeaways from these meetings? We're sending these out so that we can then still track those things down and hold people accountable. And that doesn't have to be, just a person taking notes in the meeting. Like people can actually engage and, participate and be participants, and you'll have that, ready for you, all nicely packaged at the end of the meeting. So.
Awesome. All right. Next question, and I'll make this a free-for-all question. Whoever wants to jump in first. The next question is, we throughout the conversation, there's been multiple suggestions that at some point, maybe a pause and kind of reflecting on, where things are, what you're doing with AI. How does the current pace of AI advancement compare to previous technological revolutions? And is a deliberate slowdown necessary to ensure responsible development of AI?
I'll take a first stab at it. Had some experience with making some governance boards and ethical AI, or at least thinking through what needed to be in place. There's some laws that are being discussed, especially starting in California, which tends to lead the charge with new things like that. Even some tech titans that are talking about regulations. I think the problem there that you have there is maybe not everybody understands it as well as they need to before they jump into things like that. I'm not necessarily a fan of a pause. But it is moving at an incredibly rapid pace. So, but I think if you look, just the reaction from people has helped govern that. you go to some of the models now, they're really policing themselves. Whereas before, when they first started, it was Wild West kind of, you could get all kinds of things out of it. And you really can't now. So I think it's because of self-interest, the industry is self-governing. We will need some protections in place the rest of the year when we're talking data privacy and some other things, maybe even outside of GDPR and things like that. I think a well-balanced approach is probably the right way to go. Don't overcorrect one way or the other, but to slow down the pace right now with all the innovation, I think that's a bad thing. What you really want to target slowing down is if it's being used in a bad way, not necessarily slowing down the development of the core technologies themselves.
Yeah. We're inside the last 5 minutes, so we're kind of getting into lightning round mode. Quick lightning round. Anything to add, Sha or Michael?
Yeah,
go ahead, Michael.
go ahead. Cool. Yeah, I think I agree with Vince. Every revolution we've gone through, I'm sure there's been people being like, what is going to happen? And like with the internet being invented and then like social platforms being invented, there's a lot of good that's come. There's a lot of bad that's come. And there's a lot of sort of navigating that. The pace for this definitely feels different. Right. It's being measured in, like we said, like days, weeks, months, not necessarily like quarters and years. So a pause, no, but I definitely think we're starting to enter that more like digestive period of like, what's going on? What is that cost benefit analysis? So I think things will naturally slow down a little bit. But I don't think there's need for a pause per se. Sha?
Yep, agreed. I mean, don't pause, don't be scared of technology, but definitely, keep an open mind and, take a proactive approach around learning. So what are some of the large companies, doing about things, right? Like Microsoft is backing OpenAI. They have way more probably larger customers and exposure than a business like ours. So kind of, can we use their license for some of that aspect of protection, right? Know that like, GitHub has the best legal teams out there looking at some of the, how we leverage like, creative licensing from people who are like content creators or, code creators that are, feeding these models, right? Like similar for API. I think just being on top of like what's happening, understanding kind of the context behind these policies and the legal challenges and things like that, and knowing how to protect yourself in your business.
Awesome. We've got a couple more questions that I do want to get to, but knowing that folks may be jumping off to other meetings, I at least quickly want to reshare. If you want to get in touch with Vince, Sha, and or Michael, their LinkedIn profile is the first QR code, and you can find their organizations at the second QR code here. So feel free to take a screenshot for later or grab what you want there. Also, wanted to offer up my profile. Always happy to connect with folks. Networking is a highly valuable thing, and always value that. Also a QR code for some of my past webinars, videos, and then from an Agile Velocity perspective, to get to our page around AI strategy, coaching, and training, which sort of answers one of the remaining questions. There's the QR code for that. But I do want to jump back, and we had a question, Vince, earlier, knowing that we got like 90 seconds left in our time box. You mentioned the use of AI for product management. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of things that happen on the research side. Like I modeled it after I've been a product manager, led a product management team, although most of my background's engineering. I'm still a product manager every day. So it automates a lot of the research that I have to do. When I'm looking at a feature or a product, can I get all of the background I need in a few seconds? That's really, and so providing that. The other is product research. Like when I'm looking at either the new technology or even a competitor product, just to make sure I'm staying abreast of what's going on in the field, hours of crawling around and finding things that may or may not be relevant. And so it's kind of putting a supercharger on being able to get the things that you need to see, having AI do a summary analysis, but also providing things like links if you want to go deeper on something like that. So it's like building a structure to take all of the things that you need to do as a product manager and super accelerate it. Crowdsourcing, reviewing, there's external customer surveys on our site. Like you can just send a super simple open-ended question survey out to people. It's just doing everything that I've seen or has been in my past or other product managers I've known and startups as well. It's not just product managers, and really accelerating that.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but everything Vince just described is what you can find at devsage.ai.
Correct.
All right, we are at time. Really appreciate it. It's a robust topic. We could probably go for another hour at least. Really appreciate your time, Sha, Michael, Vince. Look forward to the next conversation. Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you next time.